use ChatGPT now, who talk to this thing like a therapist, something is going to happen where a bunch of things will come up. That data will be used against those people. If you're a developer and you're going to invent Facebook and you care about privacy, you wouldn't have been able to build Facebook. When the Snowden thing came out, we realized that the government was building these systems to essentially spy on Americans and to record all their phone calls and to aggregate all of this data. That was a turning point for me in thinking about how I could make a difference in privacy. If you have enough information about somebody, if you collect enough data about them, if you learn enough about them, then you can essentially manipulate people. You can change how they think about things. You can slowly over time move them in a particular direction of your choosing if you know enough about them, because who's the best person to manipulate us? It's ourselves.
Welcome back to The Pipeline. This is episode 41. We're chugging along here. Great guest today. Super pumped to have Alex, CEO of Nillion. Thanks for coming in. Really excited.
Hey, man. Glad to be here, Danny.
Awesome. Well, I know there's been a pretty tremendous amount of overlap between the Monad community and the Nillion community. So there's already some synergy there. But just in case somebody, hasn't had their eyes open for the past couple months, what is Nillion?
Yeah, so Nillion is a blind computation layer. So what we are focused on is using decentralization as a way to build systems that focus on the secure storage of data, but then also the secure compute of data. That's why we call it blind computing. So really our focus is how can we create a better layer and better mechanisms to use our most sensitive data, but also make that usable in applications that are either on-chain or off-chain. How can we make it so that this private data that we've essentially been giving away for all this time can be used and also secure at the same time?
It's not the easiest subject for, I think, a non-technical person to understand, either on the engineering front or on the why. In terms of what is the true impact? Why do we need something like this? I will say the branding around the blind computation network has been tremendous. That's been all over my Twitter feed. If there was one word that I had to associate with Nillion, it was blind. So great job to yourself and the team there.
Well, I didn't come up with the name, so I can't take the credit for it, but I would say, it's interesting looking back at the evolution of the project, how long it took us to get to that place, because you're right, it is such a complex concept. When we think about how data is used in the world today, most people don't have, say, a super strong grasp of just how data is utilized right now. And so the idea of unsecured data versus secure data, and then blind and then blind computation, all that together is quite a complex thing to describe. And so we actually spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And so luckily we had some great people on the team who got into the creative mode, and blind compute came out of it, which has been, the cornerstone of explaining Nillion. But if I was going to double tap on it, let's look at how we use data today, right? So when you have, say, data on your laptop, or there's data on a server that you're going to a website and logging in to access that information and use that information, basically what's happening is that data is being stored in an encrypted state, right? So you're using mathematics to basically secure that data on the server, or when your laptop is locked, it's encrypted on your laptop. But the way we work with that data is we essentially leave it in that encrypted state until we want to use that data. So let's say we want to do some sort of compute, right? Simple one would be logging into a centralized exchange and wanting to make a trade, right? You want to action with the data that's on the system. You need to decrypt that data in order to use it. So now you've got it in plain text. So whatever numbers were in there, or whatever data points were in there, those are now clearly available to where you could read them. And you're running compute on the data in the clear. And then when you're done, you're putting it back in the encryption. And so what blind compute is that part where you're doing the compute, that part where you're bringing it into the clear to use it, you can actually keep the data secure in the blind computer while doing that compute part. And so when you think about decentralized systems, or you think about, information inside of an AI inference or something like that, now you're securing the data against the actual person who's doing the compute as well. That server that's out there where, let's say, you want to use your private key in some way, now can't see any of that information either. And so that's where blind compute really changes how we think about using data end to end. How can we keep it secure the whole way through and not have to do this reveal part in the middle?
Yeah, I think the common user, when they hear about like data privacy, and when I say the common user, I mean like your smartphone, your user, like
Yep.
my mom, or like, somebody who's not plugged in on what's going on behind the scenes with technology, but is simply using it because it solves problems in their everyday lives. Probably the most notable example is Web 2 corporations like harvesting your data and potentially monetizing that data. And then the common pushback from those corporations is like, oh, well, we need this data to improve the user experience, to improve the product.
Yep.
And certainly that has a degree of truth to it, but it kind of leaves the common person, myself included, with like a bunch of question marks, because you don't know what is really true, because you're surrendering this data to a company and basically saying in the terms and conditions, use this however you want to use it. I enjoy your product enough that I'm trusting that you're going to use it in the right way. Historically, that hasn't ended very well. So I'm curious how you think about like Nillion kind of changing the game, if you will, and providing more trust and transparency for the end user, but not transparency to the point where you're like, hey, here's an open public ledger and all your data is just publicly available, because that's not good either.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because like internally in Nillion, we call that the trust me bro security standard. So like, I'll give you all of my data, but you're not going to do anything with it that you say, that you didn't say you were going to do. Like, yeah, trust me, bro. Like, I'll just take it. It'll be fine. And most people, I'd say, the average user, like, well, one, trust me, bro security is how we've been doing everything. But then two, they're all actually not even reading any of the privacy policies and anything to actually understand what the company is telling you they're going to do with your data. But you hit on some important points. And I think one of the big ones has been, the monetization part has been a major driver of a lot of innovations in, say, Web 2.0, right? When we think of social media, that is a big driver for them, right? Being able to use the data in ways that generate monetary value has been essential to the development of pretty much all of these applications. Google exists off of that mere fact that it's possible. But at the same time, what I would add to that, which is really important, is that privacy has been so hard to build with, right? If you're a developer and you're, back in the early 2000s and you're going to invent Facebook and you care about privacy, you wouldn't have been able to build Facebook with privacy ingrained, even in some aspects of it. It would have been really hard. Now, could you have fought back against the whole, like, let's max monetize data and like sell this to everybody so that we can like it, can increase our quarterly earnings? You could, but the actual foundations of building with privacy have been so difficult to incorporate that really developers who are pro privacy, who want to build things with privacy, haven't been able to do that. And so a big part of what we've been doing at Nillion, and a big part of, I'd say, the innovations that kind of kicked all of this off, was that we wanted to make it easy for privacy to be a choice for the developers, for the people who are out there that do care about privacy, that want to build with it, but the bar was just too high, the trade-offs were too big, and so they didn't have a choice. But Nillion is all about, one, bringing blind compute to the world, but then two, giving that choice to the people who want to build with privacy.
Yeah, and I can tell you're quite passionate about it as well, and I'm curious how that came to be, to the point where you're not only like, hey, I really care about the privacy aspect of data and how it's used, so much so that like I'm going to go and build something that makes this, that helps to solve this problem. I'm curious, like there's got to be a story there.
Totally. And I would say, like, looking back, like as a kid, both of my parents were lawyers, but my parents were also very, like, let's say, not anti-government, but very much like protect your rights.
Yeah.
Right. Like my mom would be like, never talk to the cops. Like there's no reason to, like, if they ever talk to you, call a lawyer right away, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd always had this, say, anti-centralized, like, power, like, part of my personality. That was like my, I guess, rebellious side of like, well, I don't fully trust the government. Right. And when the Snowden thing came out, and we realized that the government was building these systems to essentially spy on Americans and to record all their phone calls and to aggregate all of this data, that was a turning point for me in thinking about how I could make a difference in privacy. The thing is that I wasn't technical enough to be able to go and, like, try and invent a new protocol to, like, bring blind compute to life. But it always been a part of something that if I had the opportunity, I really wanted to jump on, because I believe that, the only way to truly protect, say, information that's important to us, or the data that we have, or the things about ourselves is going to be using math. It can't be the trust me bro security. It has to be mathematics so that we can create some kind of guarantee that it's not, we're not trusting Verizon not to let the government record our calls. And that, I'd say that like, desire to bring privacy to the world, but then also like my passion about it has been driven by, at my core, and this is a big reason why we're building the way we are now with AI, has been that if you have enough information about somebody, if you collect enough data about them, if you learn enough about them, then you can essentially manipulate people. You can change how they think about things. You can slowly over time, move them in a particular direction of your choosing if you know enough about them, because who's the best person to manipulate us? It's ourselves, right? We manipulate ourselves in our mind all the time. We believe things that's not true because the voice in our head said so. Well, the closer you can get to that reality, the more power you have to manipulate people. Now, that's not necessarily to the like extreme of like, trying to get people to go out in the street and like do something or rob a bank, but you can change how people think. And that's a lot of power to have, especially at the scale that like Facebook operates at. So, looking at the Cambridge Analytica thing, looking at the, Edward Snowden thing, like this is a lot of data that can be used in ways that is malicious. And we're essentially relying on the people that are in charge of these, either the CIA or NSA or Facebook to not do the wrong thing, right? We are trusting them to not exercise that power in some way. And I don't think that's a world we should live in, especially with what's happening in AI.
And I was going to say, it doesn't seem to be going very well at this point.
Yeah.
Like there's concern, I think, about this stuff, and rightly so. I recently heard some statistic, and so don't quote me on the veracity of this, but like I think it was something like 6 out of the 10 largest Catholic Facebook pages were run by like Russian and Chinese like farms, basically,
Sure.
where they're trying to solicit this division amongst Americans in particular in this context. But that can happen anywhere. And to your point about manipulation, like
Yep.
they're collecting this data on what triggers dopamine and what triggers a reaction from somebody, and then they're aggregating all of that, and the models that they have at their disposal are quite good at this point.
Sure. Well, and looking at like the Catholic like Chinese pages thing, that's an outside actor utilizing the platform in a way to try and like promote a narrative or to sow dissent or whatever. Imagine if it was Facebook that was doing it instead, right? Now they have the unrestricted access to all the data on all of those users, a very powerful algorithm behind it as well that understands you very well and has built a profile around you, creating that group to basically sow dissent or do whatever they want with it. That's way more powerful than an outside actor. The Chinese building a page and then promoting things and trying to get people into it. The algorithm is supporting them by kind of being like, you might be interested in this, but if you had all of that data, now you have real power to basically change people.
Yeah, especially if you're in control of that algorithm,
yes,
in-house. That becomes really dangerous. And it reminds me of a conversation that we were just having on a live stream with James Hunsaker, CEO over at Category Labs. And we were just lamenting on basically the fact that people just continually do not care about decentralization, which is what we were talking about, and like the impacts of the risks of these centralized systems. They don't care about it seemingly until something catastrophic happens. James used an analogy like, oh, you stick your hand in the oven, you get burnt, then you take it out for, a while, and then you have to put your hand back in the oven to realize that, oh, yes, this thing is hot. I shouldn't touch that. And that continually happens over and over again where, especially in crypto, you have people here for a number of reasons, and the inherent financialization of the internet is a large part of that. So it is understandable that it is this repetitive cycle of, get burned on the centralized systems, then care about decentralization for a bit, then, gravitate back towards, whatever makes your life easier or whatever provides the best UX in that moment in time. But is it frustrating at all that these issues are so real and so prevalent, and almost every single human on earth is at risk, and you're out here with the team building day in and day out to overcome that? But at least my perception is like the average person either doesn't know, doesn't care, or has no idea like where to begin on this journey. So I'm curious how you
Yeah,
think about that, and how you know, tackle that.
sure. Yeah, I'd say it's it's the like consumer relationship with privacy is very it's an interesting one because I would say, you know, if you went up to anybody on the street and you asked them like, do you care about privacy? The answer will be yes. But at the same time, either they don't know what to do or they're not willing to make any trade-offs to have privacy, right? Nobody, people will say they care about privacy, but then not delete their Facebook, right?
Right.
You're not expecting people to do that. And so I say it's frustrating from the perspective of like, you know, I think with any company where if you built a product and you went and put it out there and people didn't buy it, that's frustrating, but at the same time, it's good market feedback. And so for us, when we think about Nillion and how Nillion expands into the future, that was a big shift in terms of what our mission really was, because it's not about, say, going and trying to get people to use privacy, trying to get consumers to change their behavior so that they're using privacy. It's really about how do we get to those core developers and those people who are building applications. A lot of them are in the decentralized world and in crypto. How do we get them to build applications that rival, say, the centralized versions, the non-privacy versions? How do we give them the tools to do that so that consumers start to have a choice? Because if we can get to a place where you get to choose, right, looking at, say, AI agents, if you could have an AI agent that does all this, like, let's say, booking holidays that isn't private, and you have one that is private, most people are going to choose the privacy one, especially if the trade-offs are low enough. And so that's really been the attack vector that we've been using, is that if we can get enough people in the world who care about privacy together, then we'll make an impact on it.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you lay that out, it was making me think of Venmo, which is a product that many Americans use, at least, and certainly globally as well. But Venmo has this feature where you can just make your transactions private,
Mm-hmm.
at least in terms of like not being on like their
Yeah,
social
yeah, yeah.
feed. Like, oh, I paid Alex, you know, $20
Yep.
for lunch today,
Yep.
and it's actually surprising to me the number of people who don't turn off that feature, because there's no added benefit of like, oh, I just paid Alex
Yeah.
for pizza, and like it's just public, and that's fine. It's not necessarily sensitive information, but why would you want any sort of like transactional trail out there,
For sure.
even for simple things? And you know, certainly in the context of the way that we're seeing blockchain adoption go, there's much more critical use cases where you need privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering what you kind of see as the most critical use cases that are also like the most ripe for adoption in the short term,
Sure.
because I'm sure some have more hurdles than others.
Yeah. So yeah, the Venmo thing is a really interesting point because it's almost like the power of default. Because really, a lot of that is driven. I mean, Venmo did a really good job of making it kind of social, like making payments social. So people are kind of geared towards that. But then also the default is public. And so people just don't flip the switch, even though it's sitting right in front of them. On the use case side, you know, for me, I'd say the most critical needs where the blind computer fits in and solves a problem is really around what's going on in AI, right? The ramp up of AI tools has been this massive wave. Like everybody, we've got so many massive companies with billions of dollars that are trying to build the most powerful, most robust, largest parameters AI models that they can. And so this race has really been like it's an arms race to see like who can build the biggest, baddest model, right? But in the wake of that, we're seeing a lot more of, say, AI agents, right? And specialized AIs coming out of that. And when I think about, you know, well, what is the future going to be for AI agents? It's going to have to move into the specialization towards you as an individual, right? If an agent is going to be useful, it needs to know a lot about you, right? If you're going to have an AI agent that deals with some aspect of your life, especially one where, like, let's say there's a bunch of preferences involved, like where are you going to go on holiday, right? You want it to book a holiday end to end. It needs to know a lot about you to be able to do all of that. That to me is the place where I think the blind computer makes the biggest difference. And there's a big need because you could have AI agents where you're essentially telling this open AI agent everything about you and then giving it access to your credit cards and your, you know, your bank statement and or your credit cards, your bank account, like all the tools that it needs to actually see the transactions all the way through. You could do that. Or you could have one where there's some privacy in it and you're not actually giving up everything about you to AI because, or to OpenAI because you want, something that books holidays, right? So that really is the area I see where Nillion is going to like cross over with AI and be able to provide a ton of value because most people get that. Most people, don't want to say, all right, well, I'm going to go sign up for this bot and give it access to all of my messages so it can tell my friends about the holiday I want to book. I'm going to give it access to, all my financial accounts so that it can go and book things. Like this is a great, I think, point where the blind computer is going to cross over with a big need that's coming up.
Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine if sticking with that analogy, like agent books your travel, that's a pretty big unlock for some people more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a big enough unlock, there's certainly going to be people that would say, "Hey, you can have end-to-end access to me. This service is really good. I'm willing to risk whatever potential negative ramifications come along with it." But that obviously puts us on a pretty dangerous path. And I'm curious if you see like two paths forward, one good, one bad. Is it more nuanced than that? And what do these paths forward look like?
Yeah. So I think there are definitely two pathways forward. There's some nuance to it, but there is one where we are focused on building the tools for privacy that are necessary to enable AI to do the productive and awesome things that we want it to do without giving away all of our information, right? I would say, what Apple Intelligence as a product, you could argue how useful it is, but the concept when they launched it was really privacy focused. They were focused on device and they wanted to have a secure system. Then they were very clear about how they were building that system on their hardware. They wanted it to be a super secure pathway. So they were promoting privacy to the top, which was a really good starting point. But it's those type of tools that I think need to be in place. And I'm really happy that somebody like Apple is focused on that. So there's that pathway where we are incorporating privacy and we are thinking about how we can bring that in at the early stages and build that alongside AI. The other pathway is really around, the moving towards that big thing that will happen in the future that is going to be that big negative point where everybody is like, oh yeah, privacy really matters, right? In that one, it's going to be, I think, a much larger sort of blow up than what we see with, data breaches and like Equifax getting hacked or Cambridge Analytica, where it's like, oh no, it's a bunch of data I posted on the internet is now in somebody else's hands. This one's going to be much more personal. It's going to be much more intimate because the way people say use ChatGPT now, not me, but there's definitely people out there who talk to this thing like a therapist. Like those, all of that type of input, something is going to happen where a bunch of things will come up and that data will be used against those people. And it's going to be a big turning point. So I want to avoid going down that pathway. I think that that's going to happen in some respect regardless, but we can be bringing privacy in a lot earlier to avoid a lot of what that could become.
So that's obviously like a pretty scary path. And
Yeah.
it does seem like if you look at this from a practical standpoint, it does seem pretty inevitable. Like
Yep.
this is how technological innovation seems to go. It's like you accelerate, you experiment, you test it out, and then there's this like, oh shoot moment where it's like, well, we probably shouldn't have done it that way.
Yeah.
And then it really bites you in the butt. And we've seen that time and again in crypto's infant stages. What does like the ideal path forward look like? If you were to basically describe like the best case scenario of how AI and blockchain and privacy protocols and internet data evolve in a way that's like least harmful to society and individuals.
I mean, I think there's a lot of ideal outcomes that I have. I would say that like to me, there's really nothing that we could do to stop, say, the arms race that's happening in AI right now, right? Like even if we put out the most money into building like the best like elements of the blind computer for AI that we could, we're not going to be able to create a secure environment for AI that can fit like a GPT-4 or whatever is coming afterwards, right? Because they're trying to build the biggest, most robust thing. So what we can do is focus on the things that follow behind that, right? A great example of this, there's a like holiday booker, but I think a really great one is around, say, Firefly's note-taking app, right? If you're putting that into all of your internal meetings as a company, all this data is going into Fireflies and you are, trust me, bro, security standard with them. That is a great example of a place where the blind computer can make a difference now, but is also like valuable to people. You don't want it to be a part of all of your internal discussions. So starting with those and seeing those come to life, I think is really the first step down that pathway. But then we're taking a step out of AI and looking at, say, just blind computer for storage and compute of data. This is where we can also look at things like composability of data. So composability is aggregating data from several different sources, or let's say several different users together, and then being able to compute across all of that data in a secure way. So if you think about, like, if you got 5 million people to contribute their DNA information into the blind computer, right? Where they have permission and access and control over that. But then somebody like, one of our ecosystem projects, Monadic DNA, they're focused on this, can use, say, AI or computation to create aggregated results around that. Out of this 5 million people, what things are true about them, like that kind of output data without revealing any of the DNA. So now you've created a whole new system of people to be able to participate in, say, doing DeSci, or, finding better health outcomes, or contributing, all of their health records in a way that it's still usable to somebody to create value out of it. And then with blockchain in the mix on that, now you've got the incentive mechanism going the other direction, where, people who are participating in that data and participating in these, say, aggregation of data to be used, can get incentivized for that. And so you can connect the data now to a usable thing where privacy is still maintained, a valuable output, and that value can then be distributed back to the people who own the data, which creates a self-sustaining ecosystem.
Definitely. And you're just making me think of, like, one of the memes around blockchain currently is that, like, oh, a lot of people say, oh, crypto doesn't really have much of a use case. And certainly we're seeing more and more use cases with, stable coins and payments and other areas certainly as well. But it seems like blockchain is like a fundamental piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? And also, what needs to happen on the blockchain side of things for this system to actually work?
So I would say that, one of the things that blockchain has really found product market fit for has been incentives, right? We're really good at the incentive systems, and what blockchain is specifically really good at relative to any sort of like Web2 mechanism is, one, incentivizing a group of people to do work. So you think about multiple nodes, like all doing work. You're not going to go into a bank account and send everybody, like, 25 cents, right? But then looking at the other direction with like a 5 million people contributing to a DNA database, it is a robust mechanism to distribute rewards to people on that kind of scale in a way that's cost effective, right? And so what you're doing is, when you're connecting the blockchain part into it, is you're allowing for these incentives to flow really easily compared to what you would see in Web 2. But for me, on the privacy side, there's another element of blockchain that I've always loved since I got involved, but is also important for a decentralized system like the blind computer. You need that that censorship resistance that blockchain offers as well. And so now you're disconnecting, say, a centralized access point to something like the blind computer. If you can remove that centralized point, then now you've got a resistant free system, so that people can't shut it down. The blind computer can be there. Everybody can participate. People can go on and build things, and removed it from, say, a outside actor like a government coming in and being like, nah, we don't like blind compute anymore. So, we're going to shut down that centralized point. So when you bring all the rails outside of Web 2 and you bring all the rails outside of the current financial system, now you have something where people can essentially participate at will, but also create value at will. And that, to me, is really important, because any centralized point can be exploited. So you have decentralization across the whole thing. That's the goal.
Yeah. And from a strategic perspective, like, how do you prioritize what blockchains you'll integrate with? Because there's many different approaches that have been taken. There's many different virtual machines, and there's so many different options, and oftentimes there are certain trade-offs and the, like, overall trilemma. But, like, how do you pick and choose, like, what, or how do you, like, view what's going to be most impactful for, like, the growth and acceleration of Nillion?
Yeah, so I would say that the what makes us integrate with different blockchains and prioritize doing that has been focused around like what are we pursuing use case wise, like what are we delivering to the ecosystem that we're being a part of, because Nillion is designed to be compute agnostic, so it doesn't have to be EVM, it doesn't have to be SVM, it can be any type of compute we can run inside of the system. So we can connect to all the different ecosystems and act as an expansion pack for all of them. So which ones we bring to the top has been, well, who's got interesting ideas, who wants to do something cool. I mean, that's a big reason why we've been so close with Monad as we've been building the blind computers, because the focus on DeSci and bringing DeSci to life and bringing those mechanisms on chain has been a really exciting thing for us. And so that's the type of thing we want to see with an ecosystem before we start doing the work to integrate.
Beautiful. Well, I think DeSci has become a bigger topic, at least within the crypto sphere, but I think it's still one of those topics that's like pretty new, and not a ton of people probably understand what DeSci even is beyond decentralized science.
Yeah.
From like your perspective, what are the cool things that are being built in the DeSci vertical? What are some of the use cases?
Yeah.
How is this going to improve research, science, what have you?
I mean, I'd say decentralized science has had, kind of a high moment, and then has fallen off a little bit after that in terms of interest in the use case, because I think the idea was, well, let's use DAO as a mechanism to like bring people and funds together and then create research from that. We can incentivize scientists to, do things outside of, say, the normal academia channels that, could be blockers, or inside of companies that have specific outcomes, or, maybe they figure something out that they don't want anybody to know, so they're like burying it. How can we like break that free of all of these constraints that exist? I think where DeSci is going, and what really excites me about that narrative and the possibilities there, has been, well, there hasn't been privacy for that, right? It has been, let's bring money together, incentivize people. But what if we started to bring in a way for people to not just contribute money to a DAO, but then contribute data, or aggregate data, or multiple, say, owners of siloed data, a mechanism for them to come together and operate inside of a system that is, wrapped in a DAO and has the right focus on results? How can we bring that information together and make it more useful? And that's where I think Nillion comes together with DeSci in a really exciting way, is composability and bringing data sets together and creating the privacy to incentivize people to bring data together, is something that we're focused on. So if you have a data set of like 500,000 users and all this information about them, about X thing, right? That's valuable to you as the owner of that info. There's other people who are in a similar scenario. You don't really have a lot of incentive to work with them and share your data set, right? And the only way you could do that right now is basically, well, you either have encrypted data and you're all putting it in some pot that's in the control of some third party, and you're, trust me, bro, securing that party, that they're not going to, one, take all that data and keep it for themselves, but two, also not share it with somebody else. And so with the blind computer, if you can remove that centralized trusted party that has all that data without any security, you now have pathways for multiple people who own data sets to come together and work together and get to useful outputs. And so I think DeSci, the expansion pack for DeSci, is really going to be around how we bring data sets that people already have together, but then also how do we bring users in and can have them contribute data in a way where they don't have to worry about privacy. The protocol itself doesn't have to worry about all of the compliance issues, but they can still create something useful that people will pay money for, or will exchange.
Yeah, it seems like of course a much more like secure and, in a sense, transparent system, but it also seems a lot more efficient as well, right? Like, in order to get these data sets and see who's run what trials and experiments and tests, it's probably like a big effort to go out and like find those people, and then like actually develop a relationship so they can get the data and work with it. But with this system, it's just kind of like individual contributors coming together, which that kind of covers the efficiency part, but then it gets a lot, like the transparency of it seems to be better as well, because then you're again not using this trust me bro security, or like this trust me bro like in the context of research as well, because even today there's so much confusion about different scientific studies and what's good for you, what's bad for you, what the science is saying on XYZ topic. Like it's very polarizing and there's very opposite opinions
Yep.
on things that have been very well studied. And that's like almost hard to believe that that exists,
Mhm.
but it certainly does. And
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to incentives, right? So, these, if one day, one week avocados are bad for you, the next week they're good for you. Like there are incentives that are driving those outcomes in those studies. And that's almost where DeSci can make like a massive impact in terms of like bringing people together to promote research, because most of the money that comes for those types of studies are coming from some sort of corporation that generally has an interest in what the outcome of that is. But, taking a step back into, say, the aggregation of data, one thing that has been core to Nillion has been returning control of that data to the user. So the idea that you could put information into Nillion, right? You're stored in this secure way and it's used in a secure way. So you're not revealing it, but you also get to choose what that data is doing. So you can participate in, say, a clinical trial and upload information for it, and it can be, used in aggregate with a bunch of other people's information. But you can also, remove that access. You have that control and that ownership over that data. That's been a core tenet of what we've been building. So, it's not just about, say, I'm giving my data to the blind computer and then, people will do stuff with it, but they won't get to see it. But, you're still in control when you're participating in something like that. There is that, like, let's make the blind computer available for everybody to bring data together, but also from a, developer perspective and an ecosystem perspective, you're right. A lot of these things are big, difficult problems to solve. Like if you're going to go convince a bunch of pharmaceutical companies to like take their data out of silos and use it in the blind computer because it could be valuable to them, you got to build relationships. You've got to build, the trust with those entities. You've got to know the right people to talk to. And so supporting ecosystem to come up with those ideas of people who have the expertise in that, come and be able to easily build with the blind computer so they can make that a part of what they're selling to those companies. That's a core facet of how we're looking at ecosystem as well.
yeah, it's clearly a monumental feat. Like
Mhm.
you not only have to go and build the thing, but you have to like go out basically and like bang on doors and tell people like why this is important, why it's helpful. And then you have to also do so in a way like we were talking about earlier, where it just becomes the default choice for users because it actually is a better user experience. It is a better service or experience at
Mhm.
the end of the day. And as someone who's been building in the decentralized space for quite a while, I'm curious, rewind 8, 10 years. Like, did you think we would be further along than we are in 2025? Did you think we wouldn't be as far along, or are we right on track?
In privacy, blockchain.
Kind of like, yeah, just like the whole, even more broadly, like
Yeah.
the decentralized and privacy ethos
Yeah.
as well.
Um, on the privacy side, I would say that I didn't have a lot of hope in individuals. But also I was looking at it from the angle, say, like 10 years ago, of like, how do I get people to care more about this, right? How do I get them not to do the things that they're doing of giving away data to all these companies and like not reading privacy policies and all those things. So I didn't have a lot of hope because of that, but building Nillion has shifted my thinking a lot because now it is focused on, well, let's go after the developers,
Mhm.
right? Because if they've got the choice, then that will feed through to the rest of the consumer market. And looking back on the blockchain side, like we have come so far compared to that long ago. I mean, I was around in the, ICO days and the Ethereum ICO, all of the stuff that was going on in 2017. And I'd say that like we've gotten to a place where I feel much more confident in the builders that are inside of the space and what people want to do with decentralization than I did back in 2017. I mean, there'd be projects that would come out and, do an ICO and raise $200 million with a white paper about we're going to tokenize power. Like, like you're gonna go out and tokenize like one of the most highly regulated, centralized, like, but also, fundamentally like say national security level, like necessary industries, like that's what you're gonna do. So like I think the builders that are in this space now understand how we need to be expanding decentralization and blockchain technology, what needs to be on top of it to get us to the next level. So we've come a long way in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that certainly in my own personal experience on the blockchain side of things. I was very much so in the camp kind of after the whole 2021 wave that
Mm.
we probably don't need more chains. Like why would we need more chains? There's hundreds of chains out there. But it really took kind of hearing the story of Keone and James, leading the HFT team at Jump, having this very strong background in distributed systems, then coming and looking at Solana and the EVM and realizing this opportunity to rebuild the EVM entirely from scratch, leverage that background, and do it in a way that seemingly no one had ever really tried to do previously.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking, like, wow, Danny, you need to zoom out. Like, there's a long kind of like evolution of this stuff in practice, and if you're watching it every day, then it feels probably like two steps forward, one step back constantly, because it kind of is.
Yeah.
But over time, like, people learn, the word gets out there, more people participate, you get the attention of more experienced and talented developers, and simultaneously the developers that are in the space are learning and improving and practicing and honing their craft. And that's just what it takes for these ecosystems to mature, I think, in an impactful way. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, and looking at Monad, the things that you guys are focused on with, scalability and making sure that we're getting very high TPS and like being able to process as much and as fast as possible. Like these scalability things do really matter because when, even when we were building the blind computer, we'd start to run into these things where, the expectation is that things can happen quickly. And the larger the system is and the larger the number of participants in it, the more important that becomes. And so, from our ends, and you guys are experiencing this as well, it's like if we built a blind computer where you could, have an agent do something, but the whole process of computing inside of it would take 25 minutes, right? Every time it wanted to do something meaningful. Great, privacy is awesome, but the trade-off of that is way too high, right? And so the more and more people you put into the system as well, like the more, say, simultaneous users you need to be able to support. And so these robust systems really matter. And having, scalable solutions, even at the blockchain level, all the way through to what we're building the blind computer, it's necessary because that speed is a trade-off. And that is a major trade-off for a lot of developers and a lot of applications. So you have to be able to support that.
yeah, it gets me thinking, like, what are currently the biggest bottlenecks or blockers for developers to go and like actually leverage these decentralized and private systems that do exist?
Yep.
What's stopping that from happening, like, right now? Why is my grandmother not use, or maybe my mother? My grandma doesn't really use any apps, but maybe my mother.
Yeah. Well, I'd say as a starting point, it would be that, the tools that we've been building for Nillion now are things that really didn't exist in a one, say, very usable way, a very like simple way for developers to build with, but then two, in an open source, like, let's put this out there, let's make this decentralized, let's open source it so that people can see all of the pieces that work underneath it. That has not been a way that privacy technology has been dealt with in the past at all. It was usually, teams of, say, academic researchers and maybe like a, like more corporate guy who they would invent some new, better way to do some sort of, pet technology. And they would take that and say, let's build a company around it. And now let's go sell it to enterprises, right? So you're siloing everything. So the innovations would happen in a vacuum and try and be sold as a vacuum as a thing. With Nillion and being connected to Web3, we're turning that on its head and saying, well, no, let's get as many people in as we can. Let's build this and put it out there so that people can not just work with it, but also expand on it. Because like in 20 years from now, if I look at Nillion, I want there to be multiple different types of pets in there. I want people to be adding their own pets and get incentivized for doing that, but then bring this whole community together. That's the way that we're going to amplify privacy as a technology. And so that's what Web3 has offered to us, is let's break that mold of like Web2, this is our IP, like let's try and sell it to a corporation. Let's make that open source and available to everybody. And then all of those people across the world who are really interested in privacy have a place to come and build and invest, and that will make the whole system better.
100%. Yeah, the power of community certainly cannot be understated. And I think even like when people, throw out community, like oftentimes in crypto you think of like, oh, the people that are hanging out in your Discord. But like that's not what community is. Like community at the end of the day is truly like the people that care about the innovation or the service that's being provided, or the ethos and the value behind like what's being done there. And again, just back to like the whole, like, if you know one word that's related to Nillion, it's blind. So like the community is definitely going out and fighting that battle in the trenches for
Yeah,
you
that's where
guys.
the blindfold came in as well. So, we've been blindfolding PFPs since like beginning of last year. And it has been really seated, I think, with the people that do care about privacy and also like want to be promoters of it, even if they're not at a technical level, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're right. It's community is really about who are the people that care about what you are building, that want that to be a thing in the world, but then also the people who are waiting for the opportunity to participate. They want to build something, they want to learn, they want to get involved, they want to try and create something out of it. That has been really at the core of the community that we've created. And I'm really excited to see what people are going to start building when they have the whole toolkit in front of them. But yeah, I mean, that's community is much more powerful than the way that we do things now, which has been, or up until now, which has been like, let's build something, create something we think is innovative, and then let's contain that in a space and try and create value out of it. Let's just, in Web3, like, let's just give it to the community instead and see what they make from what we've come up with.
Yeah, and it's just such a good way to do things, like publicly, efficiently. It comes back to like this like one liner that gets thrown around a lot. At least I've seen it a lot in like the monad sphere, which is like you can just do things. And that's kind of become this like community mantra, meaning like, no, it's not about what Alex tells you to do. It's not about what Danny or, somebody else in the monad community like says, hey, go and do this. It's like, if you believe in what's being built, do what you do best. Like bring your natural skills, your talents, like make that a part of your daily life, even if it's not a part of your daily life yet on the application side of things.
I mean, if it was going to cross compare to say like the evolution of the internet, like the internet was a bunch of 20-year-olds all hanging out, coming up with ideas and going out and implementing them into what basically is now a massive centerpiece of like the entirety of our existence. And so that started in the exact same fashion. It was community. It was people, secure socket layer as like a concept, the S in HTTPS, right, came about because a bunch of guys got together and were like, what if people want to send like important information that like they don't want everybody on the internet to see that they're sending? Like, I think people are going to use the internet to buy stuff one day, and they're probably going to need a way to do that. Like, that was created by people in the community. That was created by people who just wanted to contribute to expanding the potential of the internet. And so these technologies, and I think decentralization fits into the same category as the internet, like these things grew up by taking 2 steps forward and taking 1 step back, but also people just coming in and contributing something to evolving them.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Abundantly clear that a lot of progress has been made, which certainly has me excited. But as you mentioned, the battle is not over yet. There's much to come. I know you and the team are hard at work. If you can and are willing to share, what's next on the horizon for Nillion?
So I would say that a big focus of ours has been around, I've always seen, say, what's going on in the AI space as one of the most interesting places that we can cross connect, right? With use cases where people are really going to care about privacy there. Like it to me is an area where it sparked all of those conversations again around like, well, wait a minute, how much information do I want to give up? How much access does this company have? Like, I'm one of those people that goes and reads terms and conditions, and I see, these AI like apps that are tapping into some open source model being like, we don't own your data, but like, we're going to give you you're going to give us a lifetime cost-free like license to use your data however we want forever, and we never have to tell you. Right? It was like those types of licenses are existing now. And I think people are catching on to this, but they're also looking at, say, the sensitivity of the data that they're putting in. So that's been a focus for us. So we're really working on how do we create a secure environment, one, to run, a robust AI model, not ChatGPT 4.0, but like very robust model that can do a lot of things that an agent would want to do, and then connect that to what we call NilDB, which is actually an encrypted decentralized database to store information. So when you bring those two pieces together, what you're creating is essentially you've got this database that is secure that you can put information like preferences or whatever, credit card information, whatever, into it that you can hold on the decentralized network. And then also you've got this AI piece that can utilize that information. And so now you're creating the base level of what I would call the, say, a private agent, where those preferences and that information is there and that agent can use it, but then it's all wrapped in security. And so that's been the big focus for us. And there's some really cool releases around that are going to be coming out this year. So yeah, a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon.
Awesome. Well, thrilled to see that play out. Certainly, on the Monad side, a lot is going on under the hood, and definitely looking forward to giving developers better and better tools, and certainly as much support as possible on the ecosystem level to accelerate the production of some of these new types of applications and research and all sorts of stuff, because clearly it is quite important.
Yeah, for sure.
We do have a final question that we always ask
Okay.
on the Pipeline podcast. It is shamelessly ripped from the best crypto podcast, hands down, which is Kobe and Ledger's Up Only. I will explain it. It is called the Final Alpha, and I will kind of ramble on it for a minute or so to allow you to think. It is not necessarily alpha in the traditional crypto alpha sense. But it is really any closing message or thought that you'd like to leave the listeners with. It could be Nillion related. It could be wildly unrelated. It could be a quote from a movie or a book that you resonate with, or kind of anything in between, but some sort of closing message to leave our loyal Pipeline listeners with.
Yeah. So, I guess keeping it on the topic of Nillion, when I look at privacy, the future of our world is, one, going to be a ton of AI involvement, but importantly, I would say, if you look at your, say, physical life, like the things that make up you here on the planet outside, away from the computer, and you look at the digital parts of your identity, that digital part is going to become a bigger and bigger part of who we are, right? That will become the dominant part of our identity. And we need to invest in making that secure. We need to invest in continuing to own that, because if we start to give away, say, that identity, that digital identity now, and we end up in a future where that is who you are, but you don't own it, it's a very fucked up place to be.
Yeah. Important stuff. You should care about it. Alex, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, appreciate you.